Hey guys, welcome to the SimRacingPaddock. I'm William Marsh, and this is our first video in a series talking about how different sim racing titles feel with an open sim wheel. So you guys have been asking for me to do this for a while, and I decided for my first video in the series to take a look at Project Cars 2. Now, as a disclaimer in the beginning, I am not going to be talking about the physics. I'm not talking about the physics of either of the titles that I'm going to be talking about. I'm just going to be talking about force feedback, how it communicates from the sim through the wheel to the driver, and my thoughts. So I just want to get that out of the way, and let's get started. So Project Cars 2 is an interesting animal in a way, because there are multiple force feedback presets that you can choose from. Right now, I am driving with the raw force feedback preset, which is the recommended one for direct drive wheels, as well as high-end belt-driven wheels. So that is going to be the raw inputs, the raw car feedback being not translated, but communicated through the wheel to my hands. Then there's also the immersive force feedback, which is for the ones looking for the immersive experience. There are going to be some effects added to really pronounce it and get a more immersive experience out of your driving. And then also there is the informative driving preset, which is really going to be trying to inform you of what the car is doing. So let's real quick talk about my thoughts on the raw force feedback. And this is my personal favorite in Project Cars 2. This really does a great job actually telling me what the car is doing. It is basically intuitive. That's the best word I would put in it. You get a good feel for what the car is doing, especially considering this is, I believe, simulating what the car is feeling through the steering wheel shaft. So force feedback in a lot of ways is worked out in two ways in different racing titles. There's the force feedback being communicated through the steering shaft, and then there's also the form that is through like what the car's suspension, what the car's tires, and they add those in to try to compensate for the lack of the seat of the pants feel. So this, the raw force feedback mode, I believe is just taking the forces from the steering rack, and that is all. I don't think there's any suspension effects added, any tire effects added, and yeah, so some of the effects are going to be more subtle than you would think. For example, you're not going to feel bumps or cracks in the pavement be more pronounced. You're not really going to feel the curbs while you're going straight, maybe a little more under load when those loads are being enacted on the steering shaft. So for example, I didn't feel the curbs much there. I do feel them more in the middle of the corner when the car's under load. So things like that. But this is by far my favorite force feedback preset, and it also does one thing great that I should mention. It simulates weight transfer really well. Weight transfer is important for sim racing and racing in general. Weight transfer can make the difference between oversteer and understeer. When you're on the throttle, the car's weight shifts back. When you're lifting, the car's weight shifts forward. And you learn how to take advantage of that to get the best performance through a corner. So you throw the car's weight in, it's going to be a little less predictable. If you ease it into the next corner, it'll be more stable, but you might not get as much bite into the corner. So keep that in mind. And also you want to get a feeling for that weight transfer. So this does a good job simulating the weight transfer, the feeling of it, feeling how the weight transfers. And it feels like it's more intuitive for me being able to control the car. So I think that's just about it for the raw force feedback mode. Let's get a fresh car and check out the informative force feedback. Okay, so now we are using the informative force feedback preset, and one of the things I will mention off the bat is I am feeling some tire effects. I'm feeling the forces being enacted through the wheel of the car going over some bumps, the curb effects slightly more pronounced, and it is giving me more of an informative idea of what the car is doing. However, I'm going to say this is my least favorite force feedback preset in Project Cars 2, and there's one big reason for that. You know how I was going on and on about weight transfer in the car in the raw force feedback preset? It's almost non-existent in here. So, I'm not getting a good idea on what the car's weight is doing. I'm not getting an idea on where the car's weight is shifting to. And that, I think, is affecting my driving habits. It's really difficult for me to find out what this car is doing. So, it's irritating. Because that weight transfer that really was helping me with my driving, it's almost non-existent, and it's, in a sense, being used against me. So, I find it kind of ironic how this is being called the informative force feedback preset when it's not informing me of where the car's weight is going to, which is huge for the handling of the car. So you can see I'm kind of struggling with this force feedback preset. And yeah, I wonder if for lower end wheels the way this is tuned would work better and you might get some more of that weight transfer, but with this open sim wheel, it's not feeling good. But I can see how some people might like this. If you spend some time getting used to it, learning how the car handles with this force feedback preset, you'd like the bumps. You'd like the feeling of the bumps and the maybe more pronounced tire effects. But for me, I'm not really a big fan. So, yeah, I'm not getting a feel, and it's affecting me. I'm not getting that slip, and it's kind of a meh for me. So now let's switch over to the immersive force feedback preset and get a feel for how that behaves. Okay, so now we are using the immersive force feedback preset, and going into this corner, first thought is, wow, this is much, much stronger. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, so I am running this at 25% gain in Project Cars 2, which would be roughly equivalent to 7.5 Newton meters of torque peak, which is on par with the Fanatec Club Sport Wheel V 2.5. Apart from that, everything is the same default. So one reason I wanted to use the same effects and the same settings, or not the same effects, but the same settings for each preset is I wanted to just get the opinion on how each factor with the effects preset being the only variable. And this is much, much stronger. Everything is so much more pronounced. It's almost like they just decide, okay, those effects, we're just going to amplify them. And then also you get some of those effects added on. So I can feel some of the tire slip effects. The bumps are more pronounced. The curbs, way more pronounced. And honestly, what's coming to mind is iRacing's force feedback, which isn't a really bad thing, but it is just really coming to mind. So you might even have to run less force feedback gain with this preset if you wanted to use it. But also, yeah, this is a pretty decent, but it does feel like everything is overpronounced, and it's kind of affecting me as well. So keep in mind that this has all of the effects kind of overpronounced for that immersive experience. So it's interesting because the weight transfer is there. The weight transfer is definitely there, but it's also overpronounced. So I think there's this sense of inertia in this preset. So this inertia, what it's doing is it's creating a minuscule delay in my turn-ins. So in my turn-ins, I'm noticing I'm a fraction later in my turn-ins, especially in, say, like that kink back there. And it's causing me to be affected in a sense. So I have to mentally move back my turn-in points with this preset, which is kind of irritating. It affects my driving habits in my opinion, an adverse fashion. So this is okay. This is, in my mind, better than the informative force feedback, which basically felt mushy to me. Or not mushy, but it just felt like meh to me. But this, it just feels like everything's overblown. So let's go back to the raw force feedback preset and share my final thoughts. That is much better. So, final thoughts on these different force feedback modes and how they feel through the open sim wheel. So, as mentioned, raw is my favorite. It just, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it the Goldilocks effect. The informative force feedback felt kind of too little for me. It was missing things. It kind of was lackluster in that way. And then the immersive felt like too much. It felt like almost sensory overload. It felt like everything was overpronounced, which caused me to really affect my driving in a negative fashion as well. However, this, it feels like it's met that happy balance. It feels like everything is just right. It feels like that turn-in point where you feel the inertia is just fine. The weight transfer is just right. And the force feedback feels like it matches well with the wheel. And I like it a lot. Now, this isn't talking about the physics. Project Cars 2 isn't my favorite title in terms of physics. But for this force feedback, it really does feel great. It feels like it does a great job communicating what I'm looking for out of the car. And that's kind of what we're looking for. But yeah, so if you have an open sim wheel and you're looking for the right force feedback, I'd say just stick with the raw and adjust the gain level to what you find yourself comfortable with. It does a great job. But if you do want to add some of those effects in, you have a great option in the PC version where you could create an INI file, tweak the values. So say you wanted the raw preset, but you wanted a little more feeling in the curves. You could modify that file and create that preset for yourself. That's a nice thing that the PC version has over console versions. But yeah, for me, the raw force feedback preset is just fine. So, now I'd like to hear your thoughts. What wheel are you using, and what preset in Project Cars 2 do you like? Let us know in the comments. Also, what title would you like me to take a look at the force feedback in next? Let us know in the comments. If you haven't already, please hit that like button, and if you haven't, subscribe and help keep us on track. Also, check out the new and improved SimRacingPaddock website, and check out some of the new additions we have. For this Sim Racing Paddock, I'm William Marsh, and you have a great rest of your day.